2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day.
Yeah, which is a number that doesn't even sound real when you say it out loud.
Right. It's a 2 and a 5 followed by, I think, 17 zeros. And that is every tweet you send, every academic paper published, every medical scan, every video uploaded.
It's just a staggering amount of human output.
It really is.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Without a system to organize it, all of that data is, essentially a digital landfill. And that is exactly what we're unpacking today.
Yeah, we are getting into some really fascinating territory here.
We really are. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. We've gotten our hands on some comprehensive academic research covering emerging technologies in information organization. And it turns out the way we manage our collective knowledge has, well, it's evolved into pure science fiction.
It basically has, yeah.
So our mission today is to uncover the invisible architecture of human knowledge for you. We're going to trace how humanity went from, like, stacking clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia to using artificial intelligence and literally underground robotic cranes to manage the sum of human data.
Which is quite the leap.
Totally. And most importantly, we're going to look at why this unseen structure affects how you find information every single time you open a search bar.
Because it really is an invisible architecture. When we talk about information organization, or I/O as the field calls it, we're looking at the foundational process of making raw information meaningful.
Right.
It's the systematic process of describing, classifying, indexing, and arranging resources so they can actually be retrieved. Because, I mean, if you cannot retrieve a piece of information when you need it...
It might as well not exist.
Exactly. It's completely useless.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because to really appreciate where we are now with, AI and lasers, we have to understand the foundation. And the research traces this problem all the way back to 3000 BC.
Yeah, the Mesopotamians were dealing with the original information overload, which was clay tablets.
Clay tablets. I mean, imagine having too many of those.
Right. And their solution was surprisingly elegant for the time. They didn't just, pile them up in a corner of a room. They created some of the earliest known catalogs by keeping these small clay tags attached to baskets of tablets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and those tags described the contents, the author, and the date. So that is metadata in its absolute rawest form.
Which is incredible.
It really is.
Yeah.
It was the first time someone said, hey, we need a proxy for the actual documents so we don't have to read every single one to find what we want.
Which is a huge cognitive leap.
Yeah.
And you see that same drive at the Library of Alexandria,
Yeah.
where they started dividing subjects and author names.
Yeah.
But fast forward to the 19th century, and the volume of printed books is just exploding.
Completely out of control.
Right. Which brings us to Melville Dewey in 1876.
And what's fascinating here is why the Dewey Decimal Classification was such a massive breakthrough. Because before Dewey, books in libraries were often organized by physical location.
Like literally just where they were on a shelf.
Exactly. Literally third shelf on the left wall. So if you bought a new book and that specific shelf was full, your entire organizational system just broke down.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare.
It was. So Dewey introduced relative location using decimals. And because numbers are infinitely expandable, you could always insert a new book into its exact intellectual neighborhood on the shelf, no matter how large the collection grew.
It's like he created this universal map of knowledge.
Precisely.
But even that map eventually ran into the reality of the digital age. The research points to the 1960s as the real, modern turning point. This is when we get something called the MRC format. Machine-readable cataloging.
Yeah, that was the moment we shifted from human-readable cards to computer-readable data.
Right, because prior to MRs, computers had no standard way of understanding bibliographic information.
None at all.
I always try to visualize this. Think about global shipping. Before the standardized shipping container was invented, loading a cargo ship was just a nightmare of different-sized barrels and boxes.
Just total chaos.
Exactly. So the MRC format and later metadata standards like Dublin Core, they acted like the universal shipping containers for data. Dublin Core is essentially a standardized set of vocabulary. It's like universal digital name tags that tell a computer, hey, this is the title, this is the creator, this is the date.
Right.
And because everyone agreed on the dimensions of the container, any computer system in the world could transport and read the same bibliographic cargo.
And that standardization is what the field calls interoperability. And honestly, it is the entire ballgame.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if we connect this to the bigger picture, interoperability allows isolated systems to actually talk to each other globally. A really beautiful example of this from the research is WorldCat.
Oh, right.
Because of these standardized rules, WorldCat acts as this massive unified network that links over 500 million records from thousands of libraries worldwide.
500 million. That's just wild. So a researcher sitting in Tokyo can run a search and instantly see that the exact rare manuscript they need is sitting in a specific library in Toronto.
Exactly. It's an unbelievable tool for global knowledge equity.
It really is.
Yeah.
But as the sheer volume of global data continued to grow exponentially, the physical spaces holding that data, the actual buildings, they started to buckle.
Well, yeah, you can only build so many wooden shelves.
Right. So to survive this data flood, physical spaces had to evolve into what the industry calls smart libraries.
And we should clarify, this isn't just adding a self-checkout kiosk in the lobby.
No, no, not at all. We're talking about integrating automation, big data, and the Internet of Things, or IoT, to create buildings that essentially manage themselves. Like, look at the Singapore National Library Board. They integrated their entire public library network with RFID tracking.
Which is huge. And for those unfamiliar with the mechanics of RFID, it stands for radio frequency identification. So unlike a traditional barcode where a human has to manually find the sticker and scan it with a laser, an RFID tag is a tiny microchip with an antenna.
It's like a little radio beacon.
Exactly. A scanner can read dozens of these tags simultaneously, even if they are buried inside a stack of books or at the bottom of a return bin.
So a patron drops a whole stack of books into a slot, and the system reads all the beacons instantly, updates their account, and then, this is the crazy part, an automated physical conveyor belt sorts those books into the correct bins for reshelving in a matter of minutes.
It's amazing, but that is just the baseline for a smart library. The engineering goes much, much further when you have millions of physical items. The University of Chicago's Joe and Rika Mansueto library is a prime example of this.
Oh, the underground robot cranes.
Yes.
This blew my mind when I read it.
It is an incredible facility. So they have this massive underground climate-controlled vault holding 3.5 million volumes.
3.5 million.
Yep, 5. And there are no traditional aisles. None. The books are packed densely into these high bay metal bins. Wow.
So when a user requests a book online, an automated storage and retrieval system, an ASRS, deploys a robotic crane. The crane navigates this massive subterranean grid, pulls the exact bin weighing hundreds of pounds, and delivers it to the circulation desk.
And the whole thing takes what, like 5 minutes?
Under 5 minutes.
It is absolute science fiction. But here's where I want to push back a little bit.
Sure.
I hear this and I think, okay, the building is tracking inventory with radio waves, and robot cranes are fetching the physical books from an underground vault. Let's be real. Aren't we just shrinking the human footprint in these institutions?
It's a fair question.
Like, is the human librarian becoming obsolete, or are they just transitioning into some sort of warehouse tech manager?
It is a totally valid skepticism. It does look like humans are being engineered out of the building. But the reality on the ground is actually very different. Automation doesn't replace the intellect of the human curator. It just removes the mechanical burden.
Okay, how so? Well, think about the historical role of a librarian. So much of their time was consumed by routine physical tasks. Checking items in, taking inventory, literally walking the stacks to retrieve or reshelve items.
Right, a lot of legwork.
Exactly. By handing the physical logistics over to an ASRS and RFID, human expertise is elevated. The librarian shifts from moving physical objects to managing the knowledge ecosystem.
Ah, I see.
They finally have the time to become deep research partners, data specialists, and system designers.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You don't need a master's degree in information science to push a cart of books.
Right.
But you definitely do need one to help a researcher synthesize 50 different academic studies.
Precisely. And that synthesis brings us to the next massive hurdle. Moving physical books with robotic cranes solves the physical storage problem. But how do you organize the meaning of the digital text itself?
Yeah, that's the real challenge.
Because a crane can fetch a physical book, but how do we know which of those 3.5 million books holds the specific paragraph a researcher is actually looking for?
Right, that requires a completely different kind of lead.
Hmm.
And this is really where artificial intelligence steps onto the stage, because we are generating that 2.5 quintillion bytes of data daily, and human beings simply cannot manually read, index, and tag all of it.
It's impossible.
So how do we actually get the machine to understand the text?
It starts with optical character recognition, or OCR. For a long time, when you scan a historical document, the computer just saw a picture.
It didn't know there were words.
Right, it didn't know there were letters on the page, it just saw pixels. OCR is a technology that analyzes the shapes of those pixels and converts them into machine-readable, searchable text.
And the scale of this is just wild. The research mentions the HathiTrust Digital Library, and they used OCR to process over 17 million digitized volumes.
That's massive.
But OCR just gives you the raw words, right? How are we actively indexing new cutting-edge data? Like, how does the medical field, for example, keep up with the flood of new research?
That is where machine learning and natural language processing step in. Look at PubMed, which is the database maintained by the National Library of Medicine.
Right.
They add over 1 million new medical articles every single year. A human cataloger simply cannot manually read and assign highly specific medical subject headings to 1 million articles.
No way.
So they utilize an AI called the Medical Text Indexer. This system automatically analyzes the full text of the article, understands the complex medical terminology, and assigns the correct, standardized subject headings so doctors and researchers can actually find the research.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for you listening,
Mhm.
because this changes the very nature of how you and I search for information. Think about how we used to search the internet or a library catalog. We relied on Boolean logic.
Which is essentially using rigid commands like and, or, and not to combine keywords.
Right, you had to cross your fingers and hope the author used the exact specific word you typed into the search bar. If you searched for automobile, you wouldn't find an article that only used the word car.
Exactly, it was very literal.
But AI allows us to build what is called the semantic web and knowledge graphs.
And this is a monumental shift from rigid folders to dynamic relationships. In a traditional system, information is isolated. You put a book in a specific classification bucket, and that's it. But in a knowledge graph, AI turns unstructured text into a web of nodes and edges.
The research gives a really great example, using the historical figure Muhammad Iqbal. Under the old rules, you might just file his book under poetry and be done with it.
But in a knowledge graph, the AI doesn't just look at the word poetry. It semantically links the entity Muhammad Iqbal to multiple other nodes. It links him to poet, Pakistan, Islamic philosophy, and Urdu literature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it builds a web of context. It actually understands the relationships between concepts.
So when you introduce large language models into this ecosystem, things like GPT-4, the paradigm shifts entirely. We move from simple keyword matching to the system actually understanding the intent of your query. The AI isn't just fetching a document and sliding it across the desk to you. It is acting as a 24/7 conversational reference librarian. It generates structured abstracts, it summarizes core arguments across multiple papers, and it guides your research in natural language.
It scales human intellect in a way we couldn't achieve manually.
It's a breathtaking capability. But, as with all massive structural shifts, we have to examine the load-bearing walls. We have built this incredible automated machine for processing human knowledge. But this raises a really important question.
Right. Who is building the machine and who gets access to it?
Exactly. So let's look at the flaws in the blueprint, because the research dedicates significant time to the structural reality of this technology. And the first major crack in the foundation is the digital divide.
Yeah, implementing cloud-hosted library systems, RFID networks, underground robotics, and AI infrastructure, it requires an astronomical financial investment.
Millions of dollars.
Easily. And not all institutions, particularly in developing nations or underfunded public sectors, can clear that financial hurdle. This creates a deeply fragmented landscape.
Right, so some users are interacting with these AI-curated global knowledge graphs, while others are entirely locked out of that ecosystem and they're just relying on outdated manual systems.
Exactly. And that fragmentation isn't just about who can afford the hardware. It is baked right into the data itself. Think back to Melville Dewey in the 19th century.
Right.
When he and his contemporaries created these foundational classification systems, they were building them from a distinctly Western, Eurocentric worldview.
Right. The historical reality of classification is that non-Western knowledge traditions, minority cultures, and indigenous histories were frequently pushed to the margins.
Very much so.
They were crammed into these inadequate, highly specific subcategories, while Western history, literature, and theology were given vast, nuanced organizational real estate.
Which leads us to a huge problem today. So what does this all mean for AI? If we are training machine learning models on historical catalog records that are deeply rooted in a 19th century worldview,
Aren't we just Automating our historical blind spots at lightning speed?
That is the core engineering problem of algorithmic bias. It is a classic garbage in, garbage out data science issue. If you build a skyscraper on a tilted foundation, the whole building leans.
Wow, yeah.
The AI learns the historical blind spots of the training data, and then it applies those same limitations to new incoming information. It might misclassify or entirely obscure cultural documents because it simply doesn't have the semantic framework to understand them.
And compounding this is what the field calls the black box problem. Because when an AI assigns a subject heading or ranks a search result, its decision-making process isn't transparent,
Not at all.
right? It is incredibly difficult to open up the neural network and explain why the algorithm made a specific choice or how to manually correct it.
Which is exactly why there are massive counter-efforts currently underway to address these structural data gaps. Institutions are actively working to preserve diverse digital heritage before the AI models calcify these biases.
The research highlights a few of these, right?
Yeah, it highlights the Kutubaks Oriental Public Library in India and the Higher Education Commission in Pakistan. They are actively utilizing AI and OCR to digitize, translate, and semantically organize thousands of Arabic, Persian, and Urdu manuscripts.
That's amazing. So they are making sure that South Asian digital heritage is represented as critical nodes in the global knowledge graph, rather than just being completely left out of the machine's training data.
Exactly that. And the structural reality is why the experts in the field strongly advocate for a model called AI-augmented cataloging rather than full unchecked automation.
Meaning the machine does the heavy lifting, but the human double-checks the math.
Right. The AI can parse 1 million articles, suggest the metadata, assign the classification numbers, and build the semantic links. But highly trained human curators are required to approve, refine, and contextualize those suggestions.
Because a large language model cannot fully replicate the contextual and cultural judgment required to build an equitable map of human knowledge.
Exactly. The human intellect is more central now than ever to keep the architecture sound.
It really is a profound realization when you step back and look at the whole timeline. I mean, we have traveled from 3000 BC, pressing inventory tags into wet clay in Mesopotamia, to building underground robotic vaults, all the way to AI generating semantic webs of meaning.
It's quite a journey.
And all of this happens completely behind the scenes. Every time you type a query into a search bar or download an academic paper, you are riding on this massive, invisible, constantly evolving architecture of information.
You really are. But as we migrate the sum of human knowledge into this digital architecture, we face one final, unavoidable engineering dilemma regarding preservation.
Lay it on us.
So the research notes that AI is now heavily utilized to monitor digital collections for something called bit rot.
Vidrock.
Yeah, this is the slow physical deterioration of digital data on servers. We also face constant format obsolescence. Think about how quickly old file types become entirely unreadable to modern computers.
Oh, right. Like trying to open a floppy disk today.
Exactly. The institutions managing our data have to continuously use emulation and AI-assisted migration just to keep yesterday's files readable today.
And all of that continuous migration requires electricity,
Yeah.
constant, uninterrupted power to the server farm.
Yes. So here's a thought to leave you with. If the entirety of our collective knowledge is increasingly digital, and we rely entirely on artificial intelligence, complex networks, and an uninterrupted global power supply just to prevent our data from literally decaying into static,
Yeah.
are we building the most robust, accessible library in human history? Or are we building the most fragile?
Wow. From the ancient plumbing of knowledge to worrying about the digital pipes literally freezing over, it really makes you appreciate the invisible structure holding our modern world together.
It definitely gives you something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems you use every day, and we'll catch you next time.